My father works at a water treatment plant, and up to 8 years ago, they had these fluorine tanks. If this tank ruptures, everyone in a kilometer radius of this tank will be dead.
If someone doesn't do their job correctly, that could be you on the bottom of the ocean dead. A lot of the actions on a submarine could result in death. The biggest things, one, siloed organisations, and the second is knowing yourself, knowing your critical systems, knowing what they deliver for a business. So a simple question I always ask is, what would happen if I turn that off?
If just patch it is not the real strategy. What is the real strategy then?
As defenders, we can't keep up the speed of the attackers. You have to find those risks and vulnerabilities and harden the environment before they find them. So yeah, AI can help, but then there's the flip side, the other way again of, well, hang on a minute, how do I know it's not hallucinating? How do I know it's true?
Whereas in the military, it's a very, very different value proposition. You're not trying to make money. You're trying to make sure things are operating at their, maybe not even the most efficient, but most reliable.
But now, he's carrying around this iPad. It's like, oh, check it out. Like, all the pressure levels and all these things. He doesn't have write access from his iPad. That's just a permission level.
There's also a huge risk coming up that's happening more and more now, like supply chain attacks. In the military space, there's a lot of everyone knows the role. It's a very rigid structure. That's like a feature, right? That everyone knows exactly what to do. But in the corporate world, would you agree that that's actually the opposite? Like it's kind of a liability to have too much structure because you have to pivot and change for your customer, change with competition in the markets. Maybe can't follow the same kind of rigid structure.
So what made you kind of leave the military career behind and get into the corporate world in the first place?
Opportunity, I would say, was the sort of the major driver.
Welcome back to the Full Metal Packet. Today, we're joined by Ben Lipczynski, Director of Security and Regulatory Services at Origina, a man who spent 12 years keeping nuclear submarines from bumping into things at the British Royal Navy before deciding corporate world needs someone who actually understands what high consequence failure really feels like. After trading in a metaphorical periscope for a laptop, Ben now helps organizations secure the kind of legacy systems that most security teams quietly pretend aren't running the business. He's a rare operator who can explain why an old file transfer appliance can ruin your quarter faster than any shiny 0 day, all while gently reminding us that age, much like in certain naval traditions, isn't always the problem. Blindness usually is. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How are you doing on this fine day?
Yeah, no, we're doing well.
So, I mean, you've worked in environments where, failure has real consequences. And kind of like, what do most corporate security teams get wrong, in your opinion, that kind of differs from your military experience?
Yeah, I think that the biggest things are, well, two big things that stand out to me is one, siloed organizations, not talking to one another, not working as a team. And the second is knowing yourself. So knowing your critical systems, knowing what they deliver for a business. And it's that teamwork that helps you understand and find that and resolve any issues against it. So quite often I find that it's this lack of knowing makes it really hard for an organization to effectively prioritize their resources, to prioritize those defensive actions they should be taking. And that's not just the technology. It's, as I said, it's knowing what that technology delivers for the business. So a simple question I always ask is, what would happen if I turn that off? Could you still operate? Could you still be a business? Or how long would it take you before your business stops making money, ultimately? The military is very operationally focused, but the difference being is you could say that the military is 90% training, 10% operations. So they have this luxury to be afforded to know everything. So on a submarine, you can't get qualified until you know the entire submarine and every system, not just your own, and how it interoperates and how it acts with the other systems. The corporate world doesn't have that luxury. It's got to make money.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, what would be like the equivalent submarine mindset in cybersecurity, and does that even exist currently, in your opinion?
Equivalent mindset. So, I think it's definitely changing, but there's a lot of parallels. I think certainly for military assets and submarines, a lot of the time, or historically, it's the air gap fallacy almost, and it probably was correct. Those boats weren't connected in any way to the internet. The only way a harmful virus, for example, could have been brought on board would have been physically through one of the operators, a contractor, whatever it may be. And you've also got to remember these assets are in highly secure facilities where carrying on a digital asset is highly controlled and unlikely. But I think where the parallels are now drawn is around third-party risk or supply chain risk. So whilst the asset itself, whilst the submarine, when it's in a secure facility, it would be really hard to take on a thumb drive or a laptop to infect those systems to prevent it from doing its job. The supply chain could be compromised much earlier on, whether that be a chipset, whether that be a bit of technology, whether it be a diagnostic tool that one of the engineers is using. So I think the military is having to evolve as much as commercial industry as threat actors get more sophisticated. But the one thing that certainly I saw in my time in the submarine services, everyone on that boat was very clear on their operational objective. Everyone was very clear on their role and function. And everyone was very clear on the resilient systems. So if a system were to fail, there was no delay, there was no discussion about what to do next. It was drilled into you. And that's twofold. That's one, delivering the mission, which in the case of these nuclear bombers is the ability to deliver that payload at a moment's notice. And that's the continuous at sea deterrent. But it's also one of the most dangerous places in the world. If someone doesn't do their job correctly, that could be you on the bottom of the ocean dead. Fortunately, when an office block turns off, it just stays there and everyone can survive pretty comfortably. So it does give a different mindset. But then if we think in the commercial industry, some of these data centers, some of these offices, they're providing fresh drinking water, they're providing electricity, healthcare, medical, safety operating of railroads, for example. So I think whilst it seems like an extreme in isolation, actually, there's so many lessons that can be brought forward as about how best to approach your risks, how best to approach your resiliency, how best to prepare your teams for an incident, or even better, how best to architect your processes, your systems, and your technologies to reduce the likelihood of an event that results in 100% loss of operation ever happening. Maybe an acceptable 30% loss, but you're at least still operating.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that in the military space, it sounds like what you're saying is that there's a lot of everyone knows the role. It's a very rigid structure. I think that's like a feature, right? That everyone knows exactly what to do, and no one's innovating in their role. Let's put it that way, right? No one's taking individual agency and risk. In fact, I think militaries try to weed out super high agency from people to make sure they follow orders and follow structures and operations properly. But in the corporate world, would you agree that that's actually the opposite? It's kind of a liability to have too much structure because you have to pivot and change for your customer, change with competition in the markets, and it kind of rewards making pivots and changes at a much higher rate, which means that you maybe can't follow the same kind of rigid structure?
No, I'd say that they're similar in the sense that, so the military is stringent guardrails, but you still have to be very agile and, I guess, agile within those constraints, those laws, those requirements. The hierarchy is definitely there when there might be conflicting data, or the process runs out, and you need an accountable person to sort of take in all that information and make a call. And I think that's the same in the corporate world. You need to be just as agile. But I think what I find in the corporate world is those the investment in those guardrails, those investments in ensuring role clarity is less. But equally, the time isn't there afforded to train people. So, for example, submarine training school is about 3 years before you're even allowed near your first job, and that's learning all the systems and how to operate, engineer, whatever your function may be. What's an onboarding in the corporate world? 3 months and a couple of PowerPoints if you're lucky. So I think that's kind of the difference. Less rigidity, but more structure within which to operate in the military. I don't think it's so much a rigid structure as such.
So would you say that? So in the corporate world, it's like a few months of training, because I think there's a pressure to get like an ROI against. Like people are viewed as like an expense, right? And unless that person's like contributing to revenue, it's like, well, why are we doing this kind of thing, right? Whereas in the military, it's a very, very different value proposition. You're not trying to make money. You're trying to make sure things are operating at their most, like, maybe not even the most efficient, but most reliable, or maybe there's different optimizations that you're working towards.
100%. Yeah, the operational objective is the key. How do you achieve the mission? That ultimately is the fundamental focus. Yes, you want to do it safely, and you have legal constraints to operate within, but that delivery of the mission is the ultimate key. There is no. We hear about budgets. There is financial questions about how this costs, but that's at a different level. When you're operating in a submarine or a ship, it is that operational focus, which is your key objective there.
Okay, I think this is like a good way to continue. So, what made you kind of leave the military career behind and get into the corporate world in the first place? And I guess what was the biggest shift for you personally from the environment that you operated in for more than a decade, and then going to the corporate world?
Well, I think I could say age, family, things like that, which are key, ultimately key factors for a lot of things. But opportunity, I would say, was the sort of the major driver. A number of the roles we would have worked alongside civilian contractors and things, so it would have given us an insight into the evolving market space, and particularly cyber. The cyber was, we operated in the electronic warfare space for decades. We wouldn't have called it necessarily cyber. Cyber sort of came around, I don't know, about 2010 probably, and declared one of the fifth domains alongside ASC, land, space, etc. And ultimately what we saw was the Allies had the military capability to digitally influence, shall we say, other nations. We could do things to them. And early 2000s, the question sort of ultimately was asked, well, hang on a minute, if we can do it to them, can they do it to us? Yeah, probably. And the way you can influence a nation is impacting how that nation operates. So this is your critical national infrastructure. Is your transport working? Have you got lights? Have you got power? Have you got radio communications? All these disruptors which an operating society comes to rely on. The next question sort of naturally comes as, well, what are we doing about it? How are we defending ourselves? At which point I think everyone sort of goes, well, hang on a minute, we've privatized everything. So we can't go around telling power companies or transport companies, you must do this. And they're a commercial enterprise, so you can't just suddenly dictate that certain cybersecurity actions have to be taken because they haven't got trained personnel, they haven't got the knowledge, they haven't got the technology. It's got to build and generate this momentum over time. And that was sort of quite appealing, I think. Looking outside, the cybersecurity industry was just starting to build this momentum. That recognition of the criticality for a number of commercial industries was being realized. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to sort of move over and bring those lessons learned that I had from the military. I'm certainly not the only one to have made such a move, but I wouldn't say that it's still, cybersecurity still relies on diversity. I wouldn't want to see an echo chamber. So certainly, I think it's that mixture of people with maybe the military experience with commercial experience that makes any sort of incident response team, cybersecurity team work well.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to maybe share like a moment or like a high stakes story or an allegory from your submarine days that taught you how to think about risk that was directly applicable to the corporate world, if you can?
Yeah.
Blank asked for blank to do blank.
Yeah, that's kind of it. I'm like, well, it's also, you've also got to sort of give an, I guess, so what would have, well, I think the one thing that my colleagues certainly are probably frustrated of hearing me say, when times are tight, maybe you're not making targets and, financial targets and things. I tend to say, well, no one's going to die here, because a lot of the actions on a submarine could result in death. Sadly, you're in a compressed tube underwater next to high pressure high pressure hydraulics, high pressure pneumatics, high voltage. And then that's before you even look at the weapon systems, tons and tons of explosives and radioactive materials and whatnot. So I think the one thing it does teach you is that to really, I guess, risk assess procedures and actions before you take them. It gets you to really think ahead and think of those controls, make sure that everyone is clear and well briefed. It is a lot easier because, it's not Teams calls. You're all meters from one another. So, and no one's going to pop outside. So it's far easier to sort of build those communications and those relationships. But thinking ahead before you do anything can just, as we would say, take that marching pace. Just if something is happening, don't rush into it. Just think about it and go, well, what does this mean? And I see that sometimes not being well managed in the corporate world. Certainly, sort of cyber incident responses, it's all very exciting. People want to sort of jump into it. But just standing back just for that breather a second, thinking, what is actually going on here? It doesn't even have to be that urgent. The amount of times I see industry, huge scan report, hundreds of CVEs on that list, and everyone thinks I've got to patch it. My regulation says I've got 14 days because it's CVSS 8 and above or whatever it may be. But actually, sometimes if you just stand back and go, actually, is that CVE even applicable to me? Am I even using that technology? Have I actually got it deployed? Or if I have got it deployed, what's it doing? Is it just ordering toilet rolls? Or if this stops, does the system stop? Does my business stop working? I find that isn't done particularly well. And it drives people to push resource into the wrong space. So just the ability to just stand back and go, let's just, have a think about it just for a second. Let's just, what really matters here. I think certainly that high pressure environment does sort of give a different perspective on how to tackle things. And it's a great, it's a great environment to practice as well.
I guess there's a lot of parallels with critical infrastructure, power plants, that kind of stuff. Like, for example, my father works at a water treatment plant, and up to 8 years ago, they had these big, I think it was fluorine tanks there. And he said, hey, if this tank ruptures, like everyone in a kilometer radius of this tank will be dead. They don't have those tanks anymore. They switched to some more modern system. But now, he's carrying around this iPad. He's like, oh, check it out. I can see all the pressure levels and all these things. He doesn't have write access from his iPad, but that's just the permission level. That capability is there. From this iPad, you can essentially disrupt the entire water treatment plant if you were able to have write access. And that kind of stuff is just scary to me, that these critical systems are accessible through an iOS app.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that can go wrong here.
Yeah, no, certainly I was something I've seen as an engineer through my career. One time, if you're working on a big system, someone would have to go and do their rounds. They'd go around with a notebook and go and tap the gauges and write them down, then go back to the engineering office, write them in the logbook, and senior engineer would check that they're all in spec. And then, an hour later, someone else would go off into the machinery space, do the same. You could argue laziness. You could argue safety. If you don't have to send someone into that engine room, for example, well, let's remote it out. So then they remote it out, as you say, to the engineering office, still air gap, still within the plant space, if you will. But now someone doesn't have to enter that engineering space. And, certainly larger systems, I've then seen people go, well, why can't I do it from the office block, across the parking lot? Okay, yeah, so they get a new computer where they can remote in and monitor it there on a SCADA system. Then it's like, well, why do I need two computers on my desk? Why can't I have the business machine and before you know it, you've punched a hole from the internet down to that motor controller, as you say, which might be controlling chlorine tanks. And I think this is a great example of knowing your systems. I think this is something that slowly evolves over time. And sometimes the documentation isn't upkept. You get that churn of personnel. The historical fear of that danger starts to erode, because when you were having to go into that noisy space and stand next to the tanks, you were very conscious of the danger. Now, your daily job is sat in an office, maybe not even on site anymore. And ultimately, if you're using an iPad, at some point it's going over some public infrastructure, whether that be the mobile network, the internet, whatever it may be. So you are increasing the possibility that someone could interfere or inflict damage on that plant. I'm not saying you don't do it, but it's this knowing what you're doing and taking a measured approach and understanding the risks that you're potentially taking and putting up, appropriate controls in place. So, yeah, if you want to control your water facility or a wind turbine farm from an iPad, great. But, I've done consultancy gigs for sort of wind farms and, yeah, iPad control. What do you do with it in the evening? Oh, my kids use it to play on YouTube and things. And you're like, right, okay. And before you know it, there's so many things. Now, you're kind of almost then operating in a sort of an obscurity security space. But there's so many things out there which are looking for open ports and things. It just takes one inquisitive person, maybe not even maliciously at the start, to go, oh, I've got into this iPad. Oh, hang on a minute, what's this it's connected to? And, before you know it, they could be opening and shutting valves, not maliciously, but actually what they're doing is making a nasty mix of chemicals that is going to pollute the water supply for, an entire district. Now, if you put motive on top of that, for say a nation state actor, and broader intelligence functions, so, knowing how many people use that water plant, I don't know, knowing the chemicals on site, etc., then whilst whilst it might not be an easy attack to conduct, it's still a feasible action to conduct damage remotely. You're not having, whereas before you'd have to, I don't know, driven on site and broken in. There is now the possibility that it could be achieved remotely.
Yeah, I guess it also makes it it's like a new attack vector where you can socially engineer the kids to go play on their daddy's iPad and flip some switches. Yeah. But do you think like legacy systems are quote unquote coming online, whether we like it or not? That is happening. Do you think this poses the biggest risk to these systems, or is there another area that it's even of a greater concern than putting these things on the internet in some shape or form?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the general trend I've seen is we'll call it older technologies which were designed and implemented, I guess, pre a lot of these digital risk considerations, are ultimately finding themselves at least indirectly connected to the internet. I think that is that certainly to me seems to be a growing trend, even in terms of health and safety, as we said, not going onto site, production pressures. If you can get one person monitoring 3 water plants in a shift rather than being on site at one. So I do see that, or I have seen that in my career, with sort of operational technologies. That said, I have seen new operational technologies, motor controllers, etc., coming on with enhanced designs for security. But the life expectancy of these technologies was so long that the time it takes to, and the cost it takes to replace them, is a long time. I think for enterprise, outside of operational technologies and into the enterprise space, which is where I predominantly work now, I see a lot of what I would say perfectly fine old technologies, legacy technologies, delivering what that person needs today. And I see a lot that are actually quite secure, but there is a myth almost that you've got to be on the latest version, the N-1 analogy. Sometimes it's sold through security fear, sometimes it's sold through new widgets. But if you're going to upgrade, are those new widgets actually going to give you a return of investment in your business? And what I typically see is, because there's new functionality in there, yes, it might address vulnerabilities in the older tech, but it inevitably introduces new vulnerabilities. So you've spent all this money on new technology licensing, you spent all this money on replacing the technology to no operational gain. And when you really break it down, not necessarily any great security gain. If we look at some of the major cyber attacks in the enterprise space and the OT space recently, social engineering, as you said, it wasn't a clever exploit of any known vulnerability. Social engineering, initial point of entry, and then poor architecture, which allowed broad lateral movement and increased the impact of the attack, or ransomware, or whatever it may be. It wasn't a hacker going, CVE 2.3, I'm going to go in there. So I think there's a lot of unnecessary change, and changes inherently risky in the enterprise world. But again, for me, it really comes down to all changes, is fine. Commercially, I think as long as it is going to do something that is going to enable you to operate as a better business, whether that be more relevant in your market, more efficient, but doing it knowing the risks you're taking on. Don't just do this blind assumption that I'm on the latest version, I must be more secure.
So speaking of like latest versions, and like right now, there's also a huge risk coming up that's like kind of, well, it's always happened, but it's happening more and more now. You kind of mentioned it before, like supply chain attacks. Like I think like, yeah, very legacy systems, like, yeah, you could have like a dormant supply chain attack that's been around for decades. That's possible, but it's less likely than, on newer systems. There's like a dormant one that was introduced a week ago or 3 months ago that hasn't been used yet. We're seeing more and more of that, like in the open source software world. And right now, even closed source software uses tons of open source dependencies. So yeah, that's, I think, another major risk for upgrading systems.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we did some analysis on a number of products, and what we found was actually about 60% of the vulnerabilities in that product were not the core code. It was all these open source packets and libraries that were introduced by the programmers when they were developing that product. And I understand why. It's an accelerator to build and develop that product, but how many times have you seen a library dropped in where they only just need those few lines, but memory is not a problem now, so we'll drop the whole lot in. There's a load of dormant code there, and like you say, you're now introducing vulnerabilities, but you're also introducing code you don't know what it does. So when a CVE announcement comes out, it becomes even harder to know whether you're actually impacted or not. And you're relying on these databases for scanners to tell you, perhaps, or as is, I guess, evolving in the space now, push for red teaming or threat intelligence based pen testing and things. But yeah, I think it's I think I don't know what you call it, but the blind injection of code I think is becoming more and more a problem. It makes me think when I first started coding, I guess. Certainly in control technologies, we were doing on little EPROMs and things, and memory was expensive and incredibly tight. So you knew every line of code that you wrote. You were incredibly cautious with it. You only put exactly what you need in. Whereas I don't know how much a terabyte is now. It's a few dollars sort of thing. So it's so easy now to just go, I'll just dump that in there. It ticks it does what I need it to do. But there's all this bloat code, which is, unknown attack surface area, unknown vulnerabilities. And as you said, supply chain risks. Someone could have dropped something malicious in there, uploaded it into some sharing forum. Thank you very much.
My favorite one that is happening recently, it's I think we talked about it in a previous podcast, but it was I think it's called Slop squatting, where a lot of engineers and developers are like importing packages like agentically, right? So they're using Cursor or whatever, they're using some AI model to say, hey, go add this thing and switch from that package to that package, and they a lot of the time the AI would hallucinate the package name. So what attackers are starting to do is they're finding all these hallucination permutations, registering them, and having duplicate, like SQLite, with like a typo in it or something, or a forked of it, and it has some malicious code in it, and they're just waiting for someone to like get it injected into their package.
Oh, jeez. So that's sort of social engineering of AI, or
yeah, it's
Yeah, but even before AI, the hardware abundance made the average engineer worse. Because right now, like, you have even a simple web app could have like gigabytes of node modules, dependencies, and some of them are just like, oh, I need to concatenate two strings. Let me pull in a package for that. It's like, what?
Yeah. I just say, when you look at like websites, sometimes which are now being used as the GUIs to access sensitive data in the background. How many websites do you come across where there's widgets on it just because you can, something that just looks slightly cool or just differentiates you. But so again, increased attack surface area, increased management, blow, but no additional cost really in the scheme of things.
Yeah, so I'm coming back to just the idea of legacy systems and patching. I think you've you've written quite a bit that old doesn't always mean unsafe, but ultimately sometimes there are things that appear in exploits rather appear in legacy systems, and they need to be patched. Sometimes that does happen, but some organizations might not be able to patch it because they might be on an even older version, and this patch requires you to upgrade to the later version, but you're unable to upgrade to the later version, so you have this like rippling effect. So what should companies do if they're in a position like this? If just patch it is not the real strategy, what is the real strategy then?
Yeah, I would never say. Sorry, started going off down the path there and instantly lost my train of thought. What I talk with my customers is contextual, risk-based defense in depth. Really, what that means is, what are your risks? What are you using? How big a risk is it for you? And then what one or many actions could you take, not just at that, say, application level, but across your environment? So everything from user multi-factor authentication to network segmentation, that would reduce the likelihood of that risk being realized. So if we were to use CVSSs as a sort of a metric, comes out with a base score, you can apply your environmental and your temporal scoring based on your own threat environment and your pre-implemented actions, defensive actions, to revise that. And from that, you can then start to focus on what matters most. I think what that means is there's a realization that patching isn't a silver bullet. There's a few reasons ultimately for that. Patching typically only addresses core code, and as we said, huge number of applications out there, the vulnerabilities introduced to open source components. I would always recommend everyone to read the small print of their support package, because you want to know whether your OEM or vendor is going to support the whole application or just their code. So if this happens, who are they going to point you to? But also, that is just addressing a potentially exploitable vulnerability at one point in a line of code. That's not taking into account, as we sort of said, social engineering. What happens if someone gets in? What if an adjacent system is compromised? Could they escape and hop onto the system? So I think that I really drive people to take more of a holistic view of their security posture, alongside, say, removing bloat. If you're not using it, why have it in your environment if you're not using it, if it's not adding anything for you? There's also a speed piece here. So if a friendly bounty hunter, for example, finds a vulnerability, they'll report it under the responsible disclosure program, typically to the OEM first. And so, assuming it's validated that it's true by the OEM, this vulnerability is out in the wild, but it's not being recorded in any database. And that makes sense, because you want to give the OEM time to release a patch before you declare the vulnerability, exists. But you're highly relying that no one else hasn't already found it in the wild. So essentially what you end up with is a load of vulnerable systems out there with people not aware of the vulnerability, that CVE. So again, that further, for me, encourages, good architecture, good security engineering, layer defense, whatever makes sense in your particular threat environment. I think the other thing that patching sort of kind of concerns me is I've come across situations where the patches don't actually work. And so you might have seen occasions where CVE comes out with a patch, And a few weeks later, another patch comes out for the same CVE. So I think that leads people into a false sense of security that they've applied the patch, tick box, move on. I'm secure. So I think it gives a false measurement to businesses of how secure they truly are. I think what's also quite scary is, there's a couple of stats out there now that it's now in the hours from a CVE being announced to an exploit being available. And if you think of some of these large production systems, maybe a pharmaceutical company, they only have a few windows where they can apply these, so they can apply these patches. So it's been announced the patch is available, but you can't just turn off the production system and apply the patch. You've got to wait for an appropriate change time to do it. So you're now running at risk. What do? Do you just sort of hope that it doesn't happen to you, or do you take broader actions to, even if it's an interim, to defend your system before that patch becomes available? Ultimately, I think patches are being weaponized a little bit by OEMs to try and maintain support and a bit of dependence. And ideally, I'd like to see a situation where, applications, technologies are delivered with, in a pretty secure state from day one. That said, I've also seen, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but I've also seen applications and systems that are deployed secure, but once they get in the hand of the users, are sold secure, but once they get in the hand of the users and they do their own configuration and tweak it for what they want to do, they start punching holes into it. And then you have to understand who's responsible for understanding those risks and addressing those risks. You're not going to get a patch for that. So that, I think it's more just a broader appreciation that it's not this silver bullet that's got to save you. And there is so much more you can do yourself. But there is also experts and industry out there that can help you, independent support providers, etc., that are equipped and skillful enough to be able to secure environment when either a patch doesn't exist or you can't apply that patch because of whatever operational constraints you might have.
I guess many would have to kind of make a choice. Do we want to cause the outage ourselves to apply this patch, or wait for someone to hypothetically or potentially do it for us? But when it's a external party is going to cause a lot more damage than you're going to do yourself, just shutting down your production for some period of time and applying this emergency patch. So it really depends on the organization and how much, I guess, ultimately, how much money is at stake and how much reputational damage you're willing to endure. So
yeah, I think that reputational damage is a really key point. If you think of a telephone operator, I don't think your mobile phone user really cares who took the system down. It's just as bad press as to whether you took it down yourself with a bad patch or a poor implementation than it is a cyber attack to some extent. They're unable to make a phone call or fresh water from the previous example. So again,
your PR team can spin one. The PR team can spin the preventative part a lot easier than we got owned because we didn't patch.
Yeah. Well, again, I think again that comes to the regulation and the PR team. If you are hacked and you didn't patch, make sure that you're ready to be able to clearly convey that all the actions you did take. Or if it's a legacy technology, say it gets out in the media that such and such was hacked, systems went down, data was lost, whatever it may be. And they were using end-of-life products. Okay, but be ready as a media team, as communications, say, we were, but we measured all the risks. We did this, we put all these other preventative measures in. They came with the other advantages, etc. Even, it meant we were more efficient in our spending, so we could give, better value to our customers. But again, it's sort of coming back to the start with that training. It's about knowing who's accountable, responsible, being prepared and trained so that when it does happen, you've already thought it through. You're not thinking about it there and then on the spot. Far more likely to not induce self-inflicted errors.
So yeah, I mean, like, it kind of goes back to what your main thesis here is. Like, you have to know your own systems, know yourself, as you said. What are the key things that, like, hey, if I turn this off, what would happen to the business, right? And kind of, if you have those EOL systems or unpatched systems that are that exact thing, that if this goes off, the business is finished, then maybe you need to really think about that. And then other things may be less important, right? Maybe something, some internal tool that's being used that maybe is accessible. If you take measures to make sure there's no lateral movement or something, right? If that one gets compromised, because, okay, well, the compromise there, yeah, they'll get in, but there's not much they can do. There's not a lot of harm unless you can move laterally into systems. And that's where you kind of layer on the different approaches, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think we saw that last year with some, major production facility was hacked. Social engineered in and laterally moved and took it 100% down. I would highly suspect they were up to date and fully patched. Let's say that. But if they had thought about their architecture as well, and a segmentation, for example, or enhanced controls, then maybe the initial point of entry wouldn't have happened. Or maybe one production facility would have been compromised and you would have only had a 30% production loss. That's a far better story than saying, I can't deliver your product, for 6 months. It's far better to go, we've got a bit of delay in it. It's going to be, a few days later or 6 weeks later or something. I think it's resilience. I sometimes think is perceived as just the ability to recover quickly. Whereas I think from military times, it's also the ability to continue to operate, albeit maybe not at 100%. Maybe you have to be creative to deliver the mission because you've lost a capability.
But the military has like a little bit of an advantage because they're not infinite budgets, but like they can afford redundancy, right? They can definitely throw in redundancy. And it would be not a shocker if things are over budget there, right? Like you look at any kind of government programs, it's like over budget is like the norm. That wouldn't fly in the corporate world. If you're over budget, you're all the time, you're gone, right? Like as a leader, as a project manager, as anyone who's doing anything really. So, you have kind of these different, I guess, expectations and incentives and pressures, right? So like to know yourself and know every system and know what's going on in your company, but then you also have to move fast. And, now especially these days with newer tools, it's like things are pivoting. People are bringing up new systems, taking legacy, rewriting them. Like there's quite a lot of change happening. And it's like, how do you know yourself well when things are changing under your feet, like day to day?
Yeah, no, I think it is hard. I think the equation remains, risk is impact times likelihood. But the amount that each factor is dialed up and down, and if we assume that risk is, equates to the amount of money you're going to spend to address it, then the pressures, the military, you're right there. I think they do have that advantage, but they're going in from day one to high risk environments where certainly if you're going to a conflict area, the likelihood of being attacked is a lot higher. So that almost that investment in both operational resilience and risk reduction is quite justified. Whereas as a commercial industry, that's why threat intelligence and understanding of threat environment's really powerful. Because what is the likelihood someone's going to want to hack me? You have this limited budget, like with the military, saying, where can you apply it most effectively? But you're right, that might be it might be less on the resilience and more in the, I don't know, innovation growth space. But I think any CISO that has a really good understanding, and again, this is sort of the silos, any CISO that has a really good understanding of their business alongside the technologies that deliver it and know what's critical to delivering it, can use that information to start to formulate really strong business cases as to why money should be spent in certain areas, or not, and where those investments should be made.
Mm-hmm. All right. I guess just kind of mosey on along. We kind of like glanced over earlier. You mentioned when patching might not be enough. I want to kind of come back a little bit to the I don't know even how to pronounce this, Assyrian FTA breach that happened a few years ago, where they did release a patch and the customers did patch, but that patch was not good enough and they had to release a series of new ones. So ultimately, in hindsight, I guess, instead of just blindly patching and be like, yep, we're safe and everything is great, what else could those customers have done aside of just applying the patch and rubbing their hands together and saying, yeah, we're good?
Yeah, so I mean, we're seeing this in the European financial market as a evolving regulatory space for this. But I think there's two things. Just one's the layered defense model. So apply the patch, but understand how that exploit works, and maybe look at it from a view that, well, let's assume the patch doesn't work. What else could we do? Again, within financial time constraints. To further reduce the likelihood of that exploitation, belts and braces approach. And then there's the other side of validating the effectiveness of the patch. So we're industry's pretty good at putting a patch in a non-prod test environment before deploying it live to make sure it doesn't break the operational environment. But perhaps maybe look at testing it in the non-prod test environment, penetration test it, and see whether it is an effective control. So that, I think that comes with a couple of advantages. One, it proves the effect, you can use that to prove the effectiveness of your patch and your architecture. But in doing so, you'll also potentially find other risks and vulnerabilities, which may be more critical than what you were testing for. So regular testing, but threat-led, I think is always a good one, rather than just randomly sort of poking around a system to see if you can find a way in. Try and be a bit more focused as to what you're trying to validate within that environment.
What about, is there ever a choice? Well, I guess in your opinion, a choice to just say we need to remove this system. There's no saving grace here, and we need to remove this thing and just suffer the consequences. Is there ever a scenario where you would recommend something like that?
Yeah. I mean, if I use a sort of maybe this, an example I can think of, and correct me if it's not quite hitting the point, but Log4j back in 21, I think, is a great example. When it's first discovered and the way it was announced to the world, it caused an easy exploit ultimately. Certainly a lot of people I worked with, they had it in their environment, but they weren't actually using it. But their natural thing was, oh, we'll update it. But what that update did was it addressed that initial vulnerability, it introduced 4 more. And then I think 2 weeks later, again, they went, oh, we've got another update for those 4. And they ended up in this rapid cycle of providing updates about every 2 weeks and just trading some vulnerabilities for others. But as I said, what we found was most people weren't even using it. So why don't you just remove the vulnerable jar file, remove the vulnerable library, and move on. Now, we did have some customers that wanted that functionality, so yeah, why not remove that one and replace it with something else, like Java native logging. But in doing so, you're taking more definitive actions rather than just ending up on this, in this case, this update cycle.
Yeah. Would you agree? Engineers. I mean, anecdotally, I've observed this and probably done it myself plenty of times. Engineers tend to like fixing things, and like they'll go to a fix versus a deletion. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's more natural to think, well, I'm going to figure this out. How are we going to solve this problem and solve this problem? But instead of saying, well, let's just get rid of the problem, let's just delete the thing, just get rid of an entire thing. It's like people don't usually jump to that. And I think maybe we should jump to that first and see, can we delete this? And it's like, okay, no, all these things are going to break. So, okay, fine. So we ruled that out. Now, how do we fix it? And I think maybe not a lot of people approach it that way.
Yeah, no, I think completely. Or an alternative. You know, do we have something else in the environment that does the same thing? You know, could we delete this one, pivot to that, even if it's buying time? But yeah, I completely agree. I think there's this desire to try and just fix it, yeah, without just standing back and go, do I actually need this? What does it actually do for me? You know, is this critical?
I guess also on the flip side, which I guess is kind of counter to what Alex has said, there could also be fear of touching legacy systems, which could sometimes be older than the engineers maintaining them. And they're like, well, this thing has been here forever. Who am I to question why it's here? And I definitely don't want to touch it because no one knows how this thing even works because it predates every single person that works here. And then those kind of the systems are just left quietly in the background and out of sight, out of mind until something were to occur. And then now you have no checklist, no run books, and you're just running with your pants on fire, essentially.
Well, no, I think that's absolutely correct. And that kind of goes back to Ben's point, right? Like know yourself, right? Like know what's going to happen. Like the fear of the unknown is part of the problem, right? The fact that you have no idea, if I pull this thing out and I just delete it, I have no idea what's going to happen. That's a problem. That means you can't make good decisions because maybe nothing will happen. And now you just left something that's vulnerable, or maybe a lot of bad stuff will happen. And you now need to know that this thing is this critical, right? That means like it has high priority for patching. It has high priority for updates or maybe alternatives when they come out. I think that just goes more to the point to what Ben was saying. You have to know what systems are important.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, what would be like kind of practical advice that you can provide for, security teams who are kind of left maintaining or perhaps not maintaining or doing anything with legacy systems that are actively in production? Like, what would you tell them if you could speak to them?
Well, I think you kind of, maybe a Freudian slip there. You hit on the main point. It's the security teams aren't the maintainers, and often the maintainers are operating in silos. So if I was, addressing a security team, I'd ultimately say, get out, talk to your engineers. When you see that box number appear on your SOX screen, go and ask them what it does. What that actually is on the on the data center floor, what it actually delivers to the business. Understand the criticality of it, so that if there is an incident, you're ahead of the game. You're not just shuffling numbers. You now know that this is a potentially critical component. Equally, work with your engineers and I'd also say your software asset management teams are another great data source. But to cross-reference about what the security team are seeing, what the engineers know they have, and what your licenses say you should have. I mean, ideally they all line up. We've got 5 of those. We see 5, and we've got 5 licenses. If they don't start lining up, then you're either short licenses, perhaps. You've got technologies in there which shouldn't be in there, or technologies then there have been forgotten. So, if the engineer is only maintaining 5 nodes on a network, but the security team's seen 6, it's not without talking to your engineers that security team will know that 6th node either has been forgotten or shouldn't be there. Because it could have been. How many times have we seen technology's installed, as you say, forgotten about, all the products are moved off onto something else, but they're just not properly decommissioned. So they sit there wasting power, but they're an unmonitored threat surface ultimately. But yeah, I would say to security teams, get out, talk to your engineers. Understand a little bit about what you're actually monitoring, rather than just running a scan report and handing it down to the engineers and saying fix it. That would be my main thing.
Yeah, and to be fair, that was a Freudian slip, yeah, because we're literally kind of pushing this right now internally, because we've had teams, with these built-up walls, and we're like, no, this is not going to work, especially in the modern day and age, in the era of AI tooling, when bad guys will use the latest and greatest tool on your stack day one, right? And if we don't leverage the same kind of speed and level of communication and actually using the same tools ourselves, we are going to get left behind and potentially get owned by someone who doesn't have any checks and balances. It doesn't need to go into a series of meetings and discuss the security implications even of these bleeding edge tools, which sounds crazy, but it is kind of an era that we're entering right now. And also, I think it's also a double-edged sword, in my opinion. We've seen that Anthropic announced, "Hey, we do COBOL now," and IBM stock decreased significantly, because that was kind of their bread and butter. So applying, bleeding-edge tools on extremely legacy applications could have significant upsides, especially for discovery and overcoming that fear. It's like, oh wow, this thing is massive and no one knows anything about it, but it just works, so I'm not going to touch it. But now you can understand how it works and become familiar with it, and it's no longer big and scary. And I'd be like, hey, maybe we can actually rewrite this thing, in a reasonable amount of time, where before that would be just incomprehensible. Like, no, we're never going to do that. But you can.
Yeah, I think it generates a really sort of interesting environment that we're entering into. There's on one hand, I think we can't, as defenders, we can't keep up the speed of the attackers, so we have to change the game. We have to find those risks and vulnerabilities and harden the environment before they find them, because we can't be as fast as them in finding them and defending at the speed they exploit. But like you say, with legacy systems as well, it's that intrinsic knowledge, and people that built these systems have retired and gone. So yeah, AI can help, but then there's the sort of the flip side, the other way again of, well, hang on a minute, if the AI is telling me this, how do I know it's not hallucinating? How do I know it's true? Who can I have validate the accuracy of this instruction? Whether it be a COBOL maintenance instruction or whatever it may be. I think it. For me, again, it just further emphasizes just that point to just go take a breath and go, okay, well, the AI has told me to do this, but let's just take a breath and have a read of it before blindly just going and applying it to my environment. I think accessing that knowledge base is can be particularly challenging, but I'm always surprised by who's out there. I was on a conference call the other day, and there were students that were learning COBOL because they saw a gap in the market, and this was code which was dead, but they knew it wasn't. And you think, well, there you go. So I think if you look hard enough, it's there. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting space I think we're coming into now with AI and how it can be used both sides.
Yeah, I think right now I don't know. I'm beginning to think, and tell me if you agree, that this whole CVE and patching thing is still probably going to go away. I think it's not tenable to continue doing what we're doing. In 2023, we had 40,000 CVEs. now, 2024 or 5 went up to like maybe like 48,000. This year already we're predicting like over 50, maybe 60,000 CVEs, and that's before things like these Anthropic Mythos and all these kind of cybersecurity AIs kind of coming out. Like, what do you do when there's like 200,000 CVEs or 300,000 CVEs or 1,000 per day? Like, what do you do with that noise? Like, I don't even know how you can potentially begin to try to tackle it. I think maybe a different approach could be, taking the tools that are generating this information, the ones that are generating these CVEs automatically, right? These aren't researchers anymore. It's going to be AI tools that are generating these maybe hundreds of thousands of CVs, and you just run it against your stack on the very things that you mentioned of like, what are the most important parts of my company? Run the software against it, patch the things you find, and like ignore all the noise. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely it. I mean, it's validation. It's how do you find that signal in the noise? They say 1,000 CVEs. Where do you start? And I think, as you say, knowing yourself. What of that 1,000? Before I even look at, you could risk rate them, high to low, using, I don't know, the CVSS score. But then of these, which are applicable to me? I mean, we saw a scan result not too long ago, 700 line items. When we did the analysis, about 660 of them were false positives. That customer's traditional approach would have been to patch all 700. Of that remaining 40, we found that they'd already taken effective defensive measures for 20. So we've gone from 700 actions to 20 actions. Now, yeah, you could argue they haven't got access to patches. Those 20 actions could be seen as slightly more cumbersome than just ticking a box and deploying a patch. But just through that sensible approach of going, what really matters to me, I think would be the way. And yeah, I potentially in the future AI will have a role to play in analysing this. But I think the key thing is still validating. And this kind of is the fear for me with some of these Anthropic, or this like the recent announcement about these predictive tools, is that they're exactly that. They're just putting out prediction and making more noise. The industry needs to think of ways of zooming in onto what matters most. I mean, I think this week NIST announced that they were going to amend the way they were going to prioritise their efforts because of the increased workload, and prioritising it to risk measurement and federal requirements, I think is the way they're going to do it. But that ultimately, I suspect for the average user, that means you're going to still see other CVEs. It's just some of them are going to be completed to the standard we've come to love and expect from the organisation. And some of them, if the organisation deems them to be less applicable to their set of risk rule sets, are going to have less information in. That might mean that your risk requirements might not line up, and that might be the one, the CV that is actually important to you. But there's not going to be any drive or pressure to get an answer or the details or drive an OEM to develop a patch or a solution. So, the being able to cut through the noise and find that signal, I think, is going to be a big challenge. But yeah, it'd be great to see some tooling developed to sort of a counter AI almost that takes these outputs and starts to do that on your behalf through the application of your context. Maybe that's the way forward.
There's already companies that literally do exactly that, and I think we haven't seen it yet, but we for sure will, where the CVE text itself is the attack code for the agents that parse the CVEs. We're definitely going to see this. Maybe even
this year. Yeah, that would be my bet. My bet would be this year.
Like hiding the malicious code in the report phishing button in the email.
All right. So I guess we'll probably just start wrapping up here. So I want to kind of ask you maybe like this one final question is for those who, let's say that no one has taken any takeaways from any of this thing that we've said, and if you were to leave, I guess CISOs and security teams and engineering teams out there with one kind of master takeaway of how to operate in this kind of environment, whether it's a legacy or not, like what would that takeaway be from you?
Patches aren't a silver bullet. I think that would be, yeah, that would be my takeaway. Patches aren't a silver bullet. They're not going to, you've got to do so much more to protect your environment.
Yeah, I guess potentially like our magical AI tools might actually save us from this, and that era, an era of completely bespoke software for every single company, where no one uses anything off the shelf, and then exploitation is a lot more difficult if you can't get a copy of it from anyone. Everybody's running custom stuff, and the blast radius could be potentially a lot less because you cannot compromise multiple organizations with a single exploit. That could be a direction, I think, as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'd always say contextual risk-based defense in depth. Know yourself, focus on what matters most, and then be like, don't trust the patch, or patches aren't a silver bullet. That defense in depth, you don't just apply the patch. Make sure you know that it's effective, or what other actions can you take. Quite often, there are so many actions you can take that are far more effective than applying the patch. And that goes all the way from user multi-factor authentication, privileged access management, whatever it is, through network segmentation and down. So, but yeah, if those networks become consistently changing and bespoke and unique, that will be interesting. You got me thinking there.
I mean, there's also the flip side of this is the most secure software is the one that doesn't exist. If you can, which is a solution to many problems. To be fair,
it is. If you're not using it, get rid of it. Yeah. Reduce the bloat. I think. Yeah, reduce the attack surface area. Reduce the bloat. Rationalize what you need to do your job. There's so many analogies you could look there when you get a modern car, the amount of tech in it now, but do you need it to get from A to B? No, you still need 4 wheels and an engine.
Well, yeah, but if you wanted to drive you there autonomously, you don't need any bells and whistles.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time here, and it was really great speaking with you. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a pleasure, guys.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for your time.